Okay, so you've clicked on this video for a reason. Your film simulations just feel a bit off. You've probably downloaded some presets and then you probably tweak the colors, but then the final image still feels a bit hollow. If I'm right, then in this video I'm going to explain to you why that could be. I personally chased the perfect nostalgic look for a while, which means that I get the colors dialed in and then add some grain, but there was nothing. It felt empty and the image didn't feel real. But what is the problem? What if it isn't the simulation? What if the secret to that real film feeling has nothing to do with that final look and a lot to do with the psychology behind the shot? Well, by the end of this video, I'm gonna help you understand why. And the answer is not technical, but actually human. So stick around. So before we get into it, we need to all be on the same page. So let's do that, shall we? When we say a photo feels real, what are we actually talking about? We need to make sure it's not just about making a perfect copy of reality. Actually, the way our brain judges what's real and what's not is a couple of key things. The tiny details and whether it matches what we know about the world. First up, the details. Think about the tangible things that signal something is physical. The texture of skin, the way that light catches on a dusty table, all the little imperfections our brain recognizes from the real world. A close-up of a weathered hand with all of its tiny creases triggers a much stronger feeling of reality than a perfectly smooth, overprocessed portrait, and it feels that you could actually reach out and touch it. And the second part is about whether an image makes sense to our brain. Our brain is a pattern recognition machine, so we should not forget about that. It knows how gravity works, how light's supposed to work, how things are supposed to interact, and even how human faces should be looking like. Remember that Polar Express movie from a while ago and why it looks so weird? When a photo has cues that line up with these deep unconscious models, then and only then we accept it is believable or not. And film, because it was physical and chemical process, was really good at delivering these cues in a way that modern digital editing sometimes struggles with, even when a film image has been scanned and digitized. So the realness of film is actually an entire experience that starts way before we see the final picture. First, and this is probably the biggest piece of the puzzle, is the psychology of constraint. Shooting on film was an exercise in limitations. A roll of 35mm film will give you about 24 to 36 shots, and that's it. Every single click of the shutter had a real, tangible cost. And it wasn't just about money, it was a psychological thing. Which means that with a limited number of frames, we couldn't just spray and pray, we have to be deliberate. This forces change in how we behave as a photographer. We learn how to wait, to watch, and to anticipate that decisive moment. We become somewhat of a hunter and internalize the light, meter more carefully, and compose with a sense of finality. Because there's no instant feedback on that LCD screen. There's no immediate second chance. That whole process of slowing down and committing to a single moment embeds a certain weight and consideration into the frame itself. The final photo isn't just a picture, it's actually more a decision, I would say. And since we're talking about limitations, this also could, when used properly, turn into habits that make you a better photographer overall, regardless of if you're shooting film or digital. And if you want to know more about that, then you can check my video over here where I go deep into 10 habits that will make you a better photographer. Next up is the physical, tactile nature of the medium itself. And what do I mean by that? Well, basically that feeling of realness depends a lot on texture and micro details that tell your brain that something's solid and material. Film, as a physical object capturing light through an optical chemical process, was amazing at this. Every film stock had its own unique structure of silver halide crystals, and that is why we see grain. But unlike a digital grain overlay, which tends to be just an uniform texture applied evenly across the photo, real film grain is chaotic and therefore organic. It clumps up in the midtones and gets fine in the highlights. It actually interacts with the light in the scene, providing microtexture that gives surfaces a quality that you can almost feel. On top of that, and also quite important, is that all lenses weren't perfect. They produced artifacts such as halation, which is that soft glow that you see around bright highlights, and their sharpness will also fall off towards the edges of the frame, even more than what we see currently. But these flaws are not necessarily flaws. They're actually little cues that give our brain that sense of realness. For example, halation gives that soft glow around the highlights that I mentioned, but that also feels a bit like the way our own eyes perceive intense lights, because we cannot really take that much. And those other subtle changes of sharpness help create a better sense of depth. So much of the modern digital process is designed to eliminate those imperfections with things like noise reduction or extra sharpness, or even lens correction profiles that flatten out that unique character of glass. When we tend to overuse this, The results are images that are way too clean, way too perfect, and to be honest, too statistically regular, too normal in a way. What this causes is that our brain starts reading this as synthetic or clinical in a way. Small, hard to predict variations are seen by our brain as signs of authenticity. So by scrubbing them all away, what we're doing is creating something that, yeah, may be technically flawless, but it's felt wrong in a way. There are some tools that help with adding some extra imperfections in a less standardized way. One of them that I use quite a lot and I really enjoy is called the Enhancer, and I also made a video about that, which you can see over here. And if you plan to download it or give it a try, you can check the link in the description. Let me know if you liked it. This brings me to a crucial point of the video though. Understanding the why of the things that we use to create art is also a great source of fulfillment. So hit that subscribe button if you value the why as much as the how. Let's continue. Okay, now this leads us to the core problem with most film simulations. They are focused on simulating the style, but not necessarily the process itself. And of course, don't get me wrong, they are incredibly sophisticated tools for mimicking the color science, the curves and the grain, or basically anything about that specific film stock, but they could just be surface treatment. Applying a nostalgic skin to an image that was created without any of the psychological or physical conditions that made film feel real in the first place is not the real solution. When you just add a look into an image and this one hasn't been taken with the deliberate mindset or doesn't have the tactile depth that comes from those silver highlight crystals that I mentioned before, it creates a little bit of cognitive dissonance. Basically, the image has the right style, which triggers the nostalgia, but it misses that perceptual little cues that our brain uses to connect with reality. Our brains are wired to understand the physics of the real world, so when we look at a photo that has natural motion blur from a slower shutter speed, or the way that focus falls off realistically, our brain then sort of mentally simulates being there, and that makes it feel more immersive. Alright, so what does this all mean? If presets are the dead end, then how do we create images that feel more real? Well, the solution is a shift in how we think and how we shoot. It's about simulating the constraints that I was talking about before. First, let's embrace limitation. Let's give ourselves a little creative straitjacket. So let's try this. Let's go out for a day and tell ourselves that we only have 36 pictures to shoot. If you have a prime lens, then even better. Use it because it will force you to move with your feet and think about composition and committing to your choices. This aims to bring back that sense of intention that often is missing from a digital workflow. The second point is to learn to love imperfection. And that, for me, as someone who tends to go to the perfectionistic side, can be very difficult, but it is very important. So let's turn that sharpness down in the camera, be gentle, or don't use noise reduction at all, and you can even let digital noise act as kind of a modern grain. In one of my street photography settings, where I use aperture priority and automatic ISO, I've set it up so that my upper ISO limit is no longer 6400, but actually 20,000. This, of course, brings me more grain, but also allows me to have a camera ready for most of the time. I use this, by the way, as a recommendation of someone commenting on my video about which settings are the most important ones, which you can see over here. And additionally, you can seek out older vintage lenses that have some character, for example, some flare or that are a little soft. Basically anything that's not clinically perfect, because these are the flaws that will give your brain those cues that I was talking about. And third, let's prioritize getting right in camera. Spend more time working on the light before you press the shutter instead of relying on sliders and masks in post-production, which, by the way, is important but can take a long time. For a long time, I've been chasing those film looks through digital tools, but the realness that we've been searching for never really came through just the chemical emulsion part. A big part of it was actually the weight of each frame, the limitations we had, and the delayed gratification of actually having to wait for your film to be developed. So if you like this video and are curious about other things that are quite important but people don't tell you, then you can have a look at the video over here, which are 30 things that people don't teach you about photography. I'll see you there. That made film feel... So when we look at a photo that has natural motion, no. Okay.